Finally, Blazar's 33mm anamorphic has arrived in time for Christmas. So has Christmas come early for anamorphic lovers, or is this just a lump of coal? Spoiler alert, it might be the best lens in the set. The 33mm is the last full-frame 1.5x Blazar Remus anamorphic lens in the lineup to complete the original set of lenses, which started with the 45, the 65 and the 100mm. But then they released the B set, which has the 50, the 85 and the 125mm. Whichever set you choose, the 33 is the perfect wide-angle addition to these full sets. In fact, this lens fills a very important gap that none of Blazar's other Remus lenses do as the first truly wide full-frame anamorphic in the set. Because of the 1.5x D squeeze of the Remus lenses, your 33mm is horizontally more like the equivalent of a 21mm spherical lens. And while I have greatly enjoyed utilizing my Remus set, when using the 45mm on a full frame camera, I always felt the squeeze, pun intended, of trying to fit just a little bit too much into frame. There was always a sense that you needed to have a bit more room to play, and that I was always backed up into the corners of rooms trying to make the 45 work as my widest focal length. The 33mm solves all of those problems, but it also has a couple of upgrades over the previous lenses that really help it excel. First, while the 45 and 65 are T2.0, the 33mm is T1.8. And that extra sop of light means the lens is really good for low light work. It also means you can really throw your background out into Blur City if that's something you're into. But most importantly, the lens is sharp at T1.8. That means you can actually use it easily, hit critical focus with no issues and no drama, which can't be said for the other lenses in the lineup. In fact, the 100mm is completely unusable at its lowest T-stop of T2.8. Like, it's so soft that nothing is in focus. I have tried shimming this. It's not a matter of shimming, as Blazar have suggested. It's a matter of lens design. Just look at the T100 at T2.8. This isn't something you can easily do anything with, apart from use in some type of trippy dream sequence. The lens is only usable at T4 and up and still very soft, which begs the question, why feature a T2.8 aperture if it's not actually functional at T2.8? So while I do have some issues with the 100mm, what is promising to see is that Blazar have clearly improved their design process. They've dialed back on the crazy blooming and whatever else they were doing, and the 33mm does not suffer from any of the same focusing issues and can be used right across its T-stop range, and that's great to see, especially with the extra stop of light. Another major improvement is the close focusing ability of this lens. Anamorphics are notorious for having bad close focus. It's just not something they normally do well, and this creates an inherent limitation with how you frame your shots, unless you utilize diopters, which have their own set of limitations. It basically means you get a lot less options when framing with each prime lens, and have to swap lenses more often rather than simply move closer for the desired frame. But the 33mm has the best close focusing of the set at only 49cm, whereas the 45 and 65 close focusing distance is 68 and 69cm. And that extra 20cm difference may not sound like much, but it is huge. And I found I could get much closer to my subject with the new 33, which as a wide-angle lens makes it much more versatile. For example, here are some side-by-side comparisons of the 45mm and the 33mm, and in practical terms, how much extra width you get when using the 33mm. And that is one of the biggest pros of this lens, how flexible it feels. You can shoot wide shots, you can shoot mid shots, and even medium close-ups with this lens, thanks to that close focusing. And because of this, if I could only get one lens in this Remus set, it would have to be this one, because you can shoot wide wides and close-ups at T1.8 if necessary, with no diopters, no stopping down, basically no BSing, just a very functional anamorphic lens that is insanely affordable for what it does. Will people's features get distorted when you're up close to a subject? Yes, but it's no worse than filming on any type of wide-angle lens. And look, in your head, when you think anamorphic, you think wide anamorphic. You're thinking about the space, the expansiveness, along with the compression, that big format, big film feeling that wide anamorphics have the ability to give you. And I think this is why this particular lens feels so fun and freeing to use. This lens is uniform with the rest of the set. It has a 77mm front filter thread. It's roughly the same size and weight as the 45 and 65 lenses. The big difference is it has this protruding rear element, which is much longer than the other versions. I was concerned about whether or not I could use this with an adapter, but with the Poco Mofage ND filter adapter in place, this had no issues with clearance. That's great news for those of us who like to use these with our lenses. But it's not all gravy. I do think that these anamorphics perform excellently for cheap anamorphics, but they are still cheap anamorphics, and some of their characteristics and traits may not be aesthetically pleasing to your eye, depending on your taste. And if we look at the distortion on the edge of the frame, there's some really weird stuff going on here. It's kind of pincushion, but kind of astigmatism, super blurry thing going on, which is very funky. Now, I'm shooting full frame open gate on the Blackmagic 6K full frame, and this is what 1.5 times de-squeezed onto a 16:9 timeline looks like. But in reality, if you were finishing to a 2:3:9 aspect ratio, you would actually be cropping in by this much, which does diminish some of that weird distortion, but it's certainly not gone. And if you were using this on a Super 35 camera, then I'm sure these quirks would barely be noticeable. But at the end of the day, if you're buying full frame anamorphics, you want to full frame that shit, no half measures. So I can see for some people how those out of focus elements would be too distracting. Of course, you're not going to be putting your subject on the edges of frame, and of course all anamorphics distort at the edges of frame, but with the edges of these anamorphics being so funky, you may run into some trouble when thinking about how you frame multiple characters at lower f-stops. Then there's things like chromatic aberration, which these lenses are also pretty mediocre in dealing with. At the end of the day, anamorphic is a look. It's a vibe. If you're someone who likes things clean and immaculate, then this lens and this lens set is not for you. Personally, none of these flaws, shall we say, bother me as someone who is forever looking to remove the sharpness and digital feel of my images. The Remus set and this 33mm is the antidote to shoot directly into my filmmaking veins.
Just hook it to my veins!
To illustrate my point, this is a jar of pickles sitting on my kitchen counter as the sun goes down using this 33 lens. Now, this shot feels interesting to me. It's not lit, it's not designed, it couldn't be more mundane. It's just fucking pickles.
I'm Pickle Rick!
And yet using this lens somehow has made this frame interesting. And that's what these anamorphics have the ability to do. We all hate using the term cinematic to describe something because it's so cliche here on YouTube. We all know there's no one-stop solution to create a cinematic image, and yet using these lenses definitely does create a certain feeling, a certain something that would indeed fit that cinematic description. And while I have heard a lot of discussion about how these budget anamorphics are not suitable for professional work, I know a lot of cinematographers using them almost constantly for professional work, and clients who don't even know what anamorphic is raving about the special, unique look they're now getting without even understanding what the format means or what these lenses cost. I have been waiting a long time for this addition to the Remus lineup, and I'm very pleased with the improvements that have been made to this lens to make it what I consider the best lens of the set. If you want to see a more complete look at the other lenses in the set, click on the link beside me. As always, I am the Savage Filmmaker, and I'll see you when I see you. So it has been written, so it shall come to pass. The prophecy is complete. With great anamorphics comes great responsibility.